so much for having me. I feel a little out of place among all of these brilliant researchers and medical professionals, but I'm hoping to share a little bit today from the perspective of a therapist, providing care and support to families and children who are living specifically with CTD. Those are the families that I'm coming to you today with some experience with. So we'll start, bear with me, I do have a disability of my own. I am legally blind, and so I can't see you very well, but I'm gonna do my best to work the room with my eyes, and luckily Erin is gonna come up and support questions so that I don't miss anybody's questions for clarification or participation as we move forward. So, as I said, I am a therapist. I am trained as a speech-language pathologist or a speech therapist, and I've spent most of my career supporting children who have what we call in my field complex communication needs, and that includes kids with CTD that I've met in my work. And so I often come across families who are supporting children with many different developmental challenges, similar to those that we see in the CCDS population. And so that's how I encountered the families that I'm currently supporting and how I learned so much about this incredible group of kids. And I got a chance yesterday to spend about half the day in the kids camp, and it was just really a joy to get to know different kids and their different strengths and challenges as we played together. And I'm hoping to bring a little bit of that perspective as well into today's talk. As Sangeetha mentioned, I am studying for a doctoral degree in infant and early childhood development, and my focus is on developmental disabilities specifically, and really bringing an infant and early childhood mental health lens or a transdisciplinary lens to just trying to do better in caring for kids with complex profiles, such as those with CCDS. I did put my contact information here on the slide. I don't know how many questions we'll get to today, but I do want to offer myself as a resource to any of the families in the audience today who would like to chat and brainstorm how some of your therapeutic and educational support is going for your kids, pull on some of my experiences with children who have similar challenges, and just help direct you to any resources that I can. So that's really my goal today from that perspective of a therapist who's supporting just a handful of families who have similar challenges and joys to yours, just offering you a path today to help you navigate building those connection and communication skills specifically, as that is my area of specialty, and then also just directing you to resources, because I know that you know more than most of us. Every day brings new challenges, new joys, new questions, and that seek new solutions, and so resources beyond today's talk are really probably going to be the most essential. So, let me get oriented here. I just wanted to start out with a couple definitions. I think some of these words are taken for granted when we're thinking of children who have complex communication needs, and so I think it's helpful to start out just understanding a little bit about where I'm coming from when I talk about each of them. Communication, obviously, we do it every day, and it's really a process of exchanging information, but also exchanging emotion and thoughts and experiences with one another. And this complex system really involves several different components, and we're going to talk at length about 3 of them today, because I think that many of our kids with complex communication needs who may struggle with things like speech and language under that communication umbrella actually have strengths in other forms of communication right now, today, that we could use to enhance their overall speech and language development over time. So speech and language are related, but they're actually very different concepts. And for the average person, you and I who are speaking today, as families in the audience, we're considering these things in our own communication to be kind of synonymous. But their unique differences really are important to understand as we support children who struggle in these areas, because knowing which of these components we're supporting in a given moment can really help us tailor our approach to work on the skills in an effective and meaningful way to the child. You probably have experienced in your own kids that children can have language without speech. I know I've seen some of our kids using augmentative and alternative communication systems in my time here today and yesterday. And also we have some kids who are using some spoken forms of language as well. But we know that language can happen in the absence of speech. And also we can have speech challenges or language challenges that are occurring in the presence of speech, where speech may be, or where language may be a little disorganized and not quite as complex as we hope to see it over time. So again, understanding those differences between speech and language can really help us understand how to focus our interventions. And I want to think of speech and language here separately just to consider the differences in terms of how we would then tailor our support. And we'll walk through that at the end of the presentation. But first, language is really what we use as a shared system of meaning. So when we communicate with one another, we're using that shared system of words and language structure, right, the grammar that we utilize to really help us convey our message in our mind. But as you can see here on the slide, that can occur in a lot of different ways, including signing or American Sign Language, the use of AAC systems, as I mentioned, and reading and writing. And here I'm going to talk today about reading and writing very smally because we don't have a lot of time, but literacy skills are actually a wonderful component to AAC systems that can help kids with complex communication needs gain more autonomy as they move through their language development, even if their speech mechanism does not develop or mature at the same pace. However, in the contrast, when we're talking about speech, it's really just one means of communicating. And although it seems quite simple to most of us, as I'm up here, I mean, if we had a video running that was showing my, an x-ray of my mouth moving as I'm speaking, you would probably be floored at the complexity that's involved in producing speech sounds. You're not only coordinating the thoughts, ideas, and emotions from your mind and your language center, but you're also coordinating all of the systems of the body involved in speaking. Breathing, voicing, moving the articulators or the pieces of the mouth that create those unique sounds and sound patterns that are related to the shared code of our language. So for children who speak, having breakdowns in that coordination can really lead to unintelligible speech. And I know from some of the feedback and questions I got prior to my talk today that many of you in the audience are working on speech intelligibility with your kids. And then there are others of you who are still working on getting that speech to develop in your children. But either way, I think we can find some ways today to consider how language and speech are interacting in the development for kids and how we might use things like augmentative communication and also these body language forms of communication I'm going to talk about in a moment to really help scaffold those skills as the kids are developing more speech control. So here I'm going to talk about body language, and I put it in quotes because I think we think of body language differently as speaking adults, but it's the same concept when we're thinking about its role in communication for kids with complex needs. And as I mentioned before, body language is really a strength I see in many kids with complex needs, including the 2 kids that I support with CTD and several that I have been able to get to know over the last couple of days. When we think about body language, it's really those signals. So, language is a symbol. It's something that we use to represent meaning, whether we're speaking or using a written word. But signals are the ways in which we can still convey meaning and thoughts and ideas through things like our facial expressions, our gaze, where we put our eyes, our movements of our body, our change in vocal tone. Either with or without spoken words. Our change in tone can convey meaning using gestures, which I do a lot of, and I'll probably knock the microphone down at some point today with my enthusiasm, but also behavior patterns. And so I know we're talking a lot about challenging behavior with kids with CTD and related creatine deficiencies, and sometimes those behavior challenges, I would say in my experience, many times can be an indication of some level of communication that the child is trying to share with us. And then lastly here, I don't know how many of you have experienced this, but our kids are clever, right, when they're trying to develop communication, and they come up with some very creative ways of getting their points across. And I've worked with several children with neurodevelopmental differences that use media to help communicate their ideas, their thoughts, and their requests, such as YouTube videos that are favorites, or singing particular songs, or humming particular songs that are connected to something meaningful for them. So these signals are really at the core of overall communication development. And so when we walk through typical development, for example, in infants, we see this developmental path is at the core of developing later speech and language abilities. And so it can be simple to overlook it and take it for granted. But when we're working for kids who are struggling with multiple system differences, it is so important to make sure we understand that these body language or signal skills are super important to build. They're also, as I said, a strength of many of our kids. And so I'm a very strengths-based clinician. I believe in focusing where kids and families are in their strongest moments to build toward those areas of need. And so I love to consider these body language skills as a strength we can really move toward language using. These signals also, I'm going to use a framework today as I talk through the rest of the discussion called the Functional Emotional Developmental Model. It was developed by Stanley Greenspan and Stuart Schenker. It's probably about 20 to 25 years in the making, and it is the core of the research that I'm developing as a doctoral student. So it will be kind of overarching my philosophy today. But in that model, this idea of using body language is referred to as emotional signaling, and it'll become a little bit more clear what that means as I work through the rest of the talk today. So because that piece of emotion is so central to early communication development, I want to take a minute here to consider the role of emotion. I think when we are working in therapeutic settings, we tend to, myself as who I'm speaking for, try to separate these ideas of emotion and thinking or cognitive skills into separate pots. And we know neurologically that a lot of the brain pieces that are developing, these skills are different, but they're also very integrated. And I think in terms of language, what I've learned in my clinical practice and in my research so far is that emotion really is the thread, it's the connection, it's the spark at first that gets communication going. If you can think back to when your children were babies, or maybe they're babies now, emotion really is what connected the two of you and got your child wanting to pay attention to you, wanting to listen to what you had to say and share with them. The tone of your voice in and of itself is very pleasurable to your kids. And so they're really tuning in to that emotion and that bond very early on in order to pay attention and in that learn what you have to offer to them. So considering emotion, the spark, and also that thread that ties development together is how we'll move forward. I think it's also important to remember that each of us have an emotional intent behind what we communicate. Communication has to have emotion. It also has to have a partner. Those are the two pieces that are essential for it to move forward. And kids with complex needs also have this emotional intent behind what they're doing. And so in order to give them this proficiency that we're looking for, this ability to use body language or emotional signaling to really create these robust circles of connection and communication, we're really going to tune into those intentions in our support that we offer. And I'll talk through a little bit of some ideas of how we can do that. But first I wanted to bring this model to the forefront. It's a little bit fuzzy on the screen, but this is a graphic that was pulled from the model I use in my therapeutic approach called the DIR model. Has anybody heard of the DIR model before? If you could wave your hand big if you've ever heard about it. If somebody could tell me if someone's hand is up, that would be awesome too. I see a few. Okay, thank you. I need to get like flares or something for the next talk. So the DIR model, you know, I don't receive any royalties for selling the DIR model, but it is an approach that I use in my therapeutic work and in my research. And so I'm going to use it today to frame our discussion and really hoping it can help you bring together the therapeutic support and the educational support that you're already providing for your children. Specifically, this tree really helps us understand this idea of foundation, which is what this talk is about. And what I was hoping that this talk would do is really help you understand as parents that your parenting is actually supporting your child's development. I think when I've worked with families with children with significant needs, the lines between parent and parent therapists become quite blurred. And it can be difficult for parents to understand and to appreciate that intuition and that natural everyday interaction that they have with their kids is actually supporting their development. I think that this tree really helps us envision why that's true. And so we're going to start, for the sake of time, I'm going to breeze past this slide, but we're going to dive into each element of this tree in the next several slides. All right, so, pardon me, I got lots of notes I gotta go down. My font is about 95 point on here. Okay, so we're gonna start here at that middle piece of the tree, which is that warm relationship. That's you, all of you in the audience as parents, any of you as educators, caregivers, nannies, babysitters, siblings. This is your role in this developmental tree. Because really, the warm relationship is the nourishment. It's the sun and the water that gets that tree growing. And the key to regulating, I know that many of you are probably working to help your kids regulate their emotions and their sensations so that they can stay engaged in the learning process. And this relationship is at the heart of regulating kids. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why that's true. And all development, even development as children age into adolescence and school age, really occurs within the context of a nourishing and nurturing relationship. A relationship in which you as the caregiver are attuning or tuning into the interests and the intentions of your child. Realizing that they are thinking and feeling beings even before they can create words, even when they are still figuring out how to do very simple independent living tasks, that they have a heart in their mind of intention, and you're trying your best to decode that. We also know that regulation, which is kind of the soil at the bottom of that tree, is key. Maybe by a show of hands, how many of you would say that your child is dysregulated at least once a day? A lot, yeah. It's a huge, huge challenge for many children and many families that I work with. And as the soil of that tree, right, you guys know what soil does. It really, if you got bad soil, the roots can't take anger, right? And so regulation, oftentimes, being that integrator of systems that are both within the child and outside of the child, really promote that child's readiness to engage and relate and to learn from anybody who's trying to teach them something. So learning cannot occur, whether we're trying to teach a motor skill or a speech skill, it cannot occur without regulation. And there can be many sources of dysregulation for children that lead to challenging behaviors as well. So let's talk a little bit about dysregulation, just to set some context. You're all experiencing it in your own ways. Whoops. And we know it's quite disorganized in the way that it feels to us. I get dysregulated. I was dysregulated. I was preparing to come up here to speak. I get a little nervous. But if you can think about the way you felt the last time you were dysregulated, it really is sensations or experiences that are happening inside of you or maybe from outside of you that are causing differences in all of the pieces of you, right? Your mind, your body, my stomach was in knots, I had a little bit of a lump in my throat. We've all felt this, and our kids are feeling this in different ways. But what it might look like to us are things like challenging behavior, non-compliance, hyperactivity, inattention, non-responsiveness, disinterest. Does that sound familiar at all to anybody? Yeah. So, I think sometimes in the behavioral model, we can jump to conclusions about why kids are behaving the way that they're behaving. We tend to jump to a intentional means of behaving in a certain way, such as to gain attention or avoid a task or a demand. But in my experience, kids who are at this level, these very beginning levels of social emotional development, are rarely, if ever, using behavior in an intentional fashion the way we think they are. they're actually likely dysregulated, and it's coming from parts of their brain that are a little less at the conscious awareness or voluntary level. And this can be happening for lots of reasons. Brain, mind, and body are all connected. And I think that what I love to emphasize in the DIR model that I think is so relevant to kids with CTD is that individual differences are at the core of their developmental profile. So these individual differences are those roots down in the soil. These are all of the areas of development: motor, vision, auditory, hearing, emotions, that really we're all using as we perceive and respond to the world. And our kids with CTD are presenting with many strengths and challenges across these areas of development. And when these strengths and challenges are being worked on simultaneously, and even a simple task like, trying to brush your teeth or allow your parent to brush your teeth, there are a lot of skills and systems involved that can really go a little haywire and cause some dysregulation for our kids. So I wanted to talk a little bit about individual differences as we set the stage for supporting them, because when you're in therapy and special education services, this is really what we're hoping to support for kids. We're really hoping to take those strengths and challenges across these areas of development, adjust our interactions and our environment so that we can support them and development can take place. This is where I'm using the word transdisciplinary here because I don't know if you all are feeling this, but in the families I've worked with CTD, kids with CTD, it really has become obvious that the providers involved need to know a little bit about everybody else's job. Right? So it is kind of impossible as a speech therapist for me to stay completely in my lane. It's impossible for you as a parent for you to stay completely in what you thought your lane was, because we're all being tasked with understanding just a little bit about all of it so that we can have a holistic and transdisciplinary approach for these kids. You're probably all encountering OTs, PTs, maybe SLPs, and behavior therapists, counselors, educators, and we know how crucial all of them are to supporting these individual differences. And then, of course, you as the family, I don't know how many of you feel like you're also a case manager on the side that you don't get paid for, all right, where you're trying to help everybody understand. Yeah, I see a big hand in the back. Everybody understand, I heard yesterday, what CTD is in the first place, but also what you're learning each day about the profile for these kids, and then trying to share with other providers who may have never heard about these disorders in their careers. So we can support through collaboration. Obviously, our medical and therapeutic and educational teams need to be speaking to one another. And I have found in my role, taking more of a palliative care model. I don't know how many of you have heard the term palliative care. It's usually referred to as end-of-life care, but they're not actually the same thing. But I think the model has really taught us a lot and continues to develop a lot of insight into the importance of having a central team member that is not a family member try to take on some of this transdisciplinary role and help families coordinate all of these medical and therapeutic interventions that their child are undertaking. All right, so then we talked a lot about dysregulation. We talked about how it can come from individual differences that each child is working on simultaneously. So let's talk a little bit about what I found that supports self-regulation. We know we want our kids to be self-regulated. Sometimes we use a lot of external tools like fidgets and sensory toys and movement, and those are all great. But actually, many kids who are early on in their social emotional development, which I'd say is many of the kids that I've met in my time here, really they need you as caregivers to be regulated and to be regulating. You're actually the most important tool. I'm going to put you in quotes as a tool because I know you're not a tool. You probably feel like a tool on a daily basis as a parent. I know I sure do. But you are the best regulator for your child. And your just presence, your warm relationship, the way that you use your tone of voice, your what I'm calling affect or your emotion that's conveyed through your body and your voice, really is a key regulator for your child. So I want to take a moment to share a quick video of this in action. I was told if I click it, it will work. So cross your fingers. We're going to see a video of a little guy with CTD. You may recognize this little guy and his mom. Right before this clip, I just did a home visit with them in Seattle, and I was able to capture a lot of data on how he's doing with the coaching strategies we've been working on. He was very dysregulated. As you'll be able to see in the video, he's using a lot of what is called verbal perseveration. He's speaking scripts over and over again. His vocal tone is escalating. He's getting very close and very intense and tight in his muscles, and his speech is very rapid. And then what you'll also notice, I hope, is the ways in which his mother is using her presence and her relationship to regulate him. It didn't work. Maybe this one will work. No. Hey, there's like a magician in the back that's helping me out. Thank you.
No, we're going to do it again. Should we say hi to teacher Tanna? See? The cheese?
Hi, teacher Tanna sitting home.
I want to hear your story about today's adventure.
So after we at the bagel shop, Rohan had a bagel with cucumbers and with fruits. And Nico had some milky. And Rohan looked at the buses. He saw a friend, and that friend was not his friend Yuk, but looked like Yuk.
Let's go walk you.
Oh, yesterday we went for a walk with Yuk. That's
Do
right.
a thing.
Oh, you like that? But you were very, very anxious yesterday.
Do a thing.
Yeah. And then after the tea shop, after the bagel shop, we went with a stroller. We stopped by a donut shop, and now we're at the tea shop. And at the tea shop, we're picking up a little present for teacher Tanna. Yeah?
Where you Nico?
Nico's right here.
So it's a pretty subtle clip. What I hope you hear is that escalation. You can clearly see he's anxious. His mother even labels the fact that he's been anxious. But what she's using is what the family's developed here as a once upon a time strategy. They're using some personal narrative approaches where they're walking through their routine, which I've heard many researchers mention how important routine is to these kids. But you probably noticed her tone. Right? Her tone is even, it's calming, it's kind of that motherese tone. She's got him on her lap. That point of contact is regulating his body. She's also swaying him a bit in her knees. She doesn't realize she's doing that, but she is. And what did you notice her doing on his back? Yeah. So, he's not a baby. He's a big kid, and I don't think she was treating him like a baby, but she was giving him the contact and the regulating language and the tone of voice that he needed in order to ground himself. Something made him anxious. I think at this point it was he did not want to go in the tea shop, even though teacher Tanna, that's me, wanted to go in the tea shop. He wasn't too thrilled about it. And so he was using language that was dysregulating, and his mother was trying to anchor him in language that was more relevant to the moment.
Now.
There we go. So I want to move up the trunk of that tree now. We've been in the soil regulation. We've got those roots coming down, those individual differences. This trunk is the social emotional development piece of the model. And really, these are all those important skills and abilities that help a child grow and interact with others. So everything you're working on in therapy to get those individual differences online is really striving toward these elements in the trunk. And that's things like developing engagement with others, relatedness with others, using communication signals, and then eventually using language. There's actually been wonderful research over the past 20 years. It's probably a little obscure in this realm of research, but I'd be happy to share it with anybody who's interested in some weekend reading. But it's really leaning toward how integrated emotions are, even in academic subject learning. So emotions are really, those emotional connections are really the foundation for concepts even like logic and math. If you think about your little ones that are, how many of them like cookies in the room? Got any little ones who like cookies? Right. So one of the first ways that kids learn about quantity is understanding that more of something means it's like what I really love, right? The thing I want more of. And then when I give you, when you give me a lot of something, right, I get to see that that pleasurable thing I love is actually represented in this quantity, like, wow, you just gave me a lot more than I expected, right? That was a lot. Or even things like justice. Anybody have siblings who argue and fight? No, never, right? Never. So justice is learned in relationships at first. We get it refined over language and thinking over time, but it starts in the relationship, right? How come he got 2 cookies and I only got 1? That's not fair. And so that emotional, social relationship is really the heart of some of those even more complex mathematical skills. So when we think about social emotional development in the DIR model breaks these down into capacities. We don't have time to go into all the jargony talk here, but I listed them on the slide, and we'll spend some time for the rest of the talk today talking through the first 4. We've already talked a little bit about self-regulation, but I do want to talk a lot more about engaging and relating and using that two-way communication. So for the sake of time, I'm going to skip this slide, and we will go into that. As we go down, there we go. So engaging and relating. Anybody in the room would say that your child has a hard time engaging with you when you're trying to teach them something. And engaging, really, that's a word that means they're looking at you, they're interested, they're sticking around, they look like they're listening, and maybe they're even having a good time. So that is key to learning anything, as we talked about in the beginning of the talk, and it really is, that connection that with others, making those, maybe it's not eye contact for all children, but it's their special, unique way of showing you that they're engaging with what you're saying and with what you're doing. And it's going to look different depending on their profile, but you'll know when it's happening. You can get that sense of momentum. You're like, oh, I got him. I've got that gleam in the eye. They're interested in what I'm trying to do with them here. That's engagement. When you don't have that, it doesn't matter how many times you ask them to say a word or to follow a sign or to look at their AAC device, it probably isn't going to happen. And so we know that we need to support engagement. It can be tricky sometimes to know how to support engagement when we have our own agenda as teachers, right, or moms and dads. But we're going to start really by using that relationship and really helping us promote regulation first. So if the child is showing that they're not regulated, maybe through their behavior, that is the number one goal of the relationship. We're really going to need to use our tone, our presence, and our strategies to help that child regulate so that they can connect with us rather than spend all of their energy trying to get out of the situation or freezing, right? That fight, flight, or freeze response that many of our kids get into when their brains are overwhelmed. We also need to try to be as child-led as possible, and this is where play comes in. I don't know how many of you, their kids are participating in play-based therapies. It doesn't look like a lot of scientific work is going on. I've had some parents be like, what are you doing exactly? Because it looks like you're just playing with my child. And that is really, in essence, what most of our kids need, even kids that are older in their developmental age, need us to find those interests that they are leading and to follow those interests to keep them engaged. We also can take advantage of those everyday moments. We don't need to have special activities to work on helping kids engage and communicate. We can take advantage of those mundane things like getting dressed, or we'll see a video in a minute of getting water even. And then we know we need to adjust those learning opportunities to the developmental needs of our child. And that's where I'm hoping that your education and therapy team is able to help you see when you might be coming in a little high developmentally and when that might actually be overwhelming your child and getting them disengaged when you want them to push forward. So let's take a minute here. We're going to watch this video about how that social connection can make developmental tasks, like a fine motor task that you're going to see here, a lot more meaningful, engaging, and relevant. So I'm going to set up this clip. Whoops, sorry, can you just pause it for 1 second? Thank you. I just want to set up this clip quickly. This is a child with CTD as well. And here, I really want to highlight here what you're seeing as far as his connection to the task. So is he going through the motions, or does he seem to be socially and emotionally connected to what he's doing? Thank you. If you could play it, that would be great.
Ooh, a new color. Here. Color right here. That one's empty. Ready. Oh, that's beautiful.
Wow.
I've never seen him this interested.
Oh, that's so good. Good job. Oh, look at, oh my gosh, you're drawing such pretty design. It looks like a flower. Amazing.
Wow.
Oh.
Good
It's
job.
so special for Daddy.
What is that?
Oh.
Oh, you're blending it in. Smart. Oh, I know. Do you want another color? How about we try... Oh, you want that one? Okay. Here. There you go. Is that purple?
Cookie toy, I liked it. I got it for Kevin, but I really liked it. Cookie toy.
Good job, buddy. Wow.
Wait, what is he doing?
He's drawing it on Daddy's couch.
Do you want me to help you write
That
happy
looks
birthday?
like a heart.
Yeah. We're all so proud of
It
you.
looks
We love
like a
watching you
heart.
do this, Cadman.
Oh, there's like...
So I want to highlight a couple things that I just think are so beautiful from that clip that maybe are easy to overlook. One of the things that I loved about watching this was that it was clear that the purpose for that activity was set up ahead of time, right? So we're not just going to color and scribble. We're actually making something for somebody who is really important to us, a relationship, right? And I don't know that that is his favorite activity to do, scribble and color. It's not. But did he look engaged? He didn't look like he was going through the motions. He took several turns in that activity, not only to add to the act of doing it, but also the communication. If you can call out, what types of communication did you see happening from him? Yeah, gaze, a lot of gaze. Gesture. Sounds, yes. I think it would be easy to watch that and say, well, are those sounds actually meaningful? I think they are quite meaningful. I actually heard some variation in the way that he was using his sounds. And what I love most as well about the way his partners were interacting is there was a little bit of directives at the beginning of, here, why don't you draw on this side? But did anybody give him any directions on what he should be doing otherwise? No, they gave him space and time to really lead the activity. And every time he used gaze, somebody was there with a warm comment of affirmation, right, or encouragement. And every time he made a vocalization, someone responded to it with a meaningful response that added to the conversation and didn't give him more tasks to do. And so I think that this is just a beautiful example of even something simple like making a card can be socially connected and meaningful. And also as a partner, you can encourage it by focusing on the interaction and not on the task, right? It wasn't like, draw this, do this, use the color. It was focusing on how proud I am of you, how wonderful your dad's gonna love this card, right? So tying that meaning in also builds that child's sense of self. I was able to create something to show my love for my person. All right. There we go. So then, I think I'm on this one. Yes, good. So then that really also highlighted, I talked a little bit about that circles of communication. And one of the key areas of progress that I would love to encourage you all to watch for in your children, even when words are not coming, even when that AAC device is just propping the door open and isn't really, finding its way into any meaningful interactions at home, is to get these circles of communication going. No matter how your child communicates, we want to see those back and forths over and over, 30, 40, 50 signals of communication going back and forth. I lost count in that video, but I told you I was going to knock the microphone over. I think that there were at least a dozen circles of communication that were taking place in that short interaction. And really, we want to focus here on getting communication and not necessarily speech, right? And so when we're getting this two-way communication, that child is always going to initiate. So we want to wait for the child to initiate, and then we're going to respond in a way that keeps the conversation going, and then give them some space to take another turn. And that turn may be an act with the material. It may be use of their gaze or gesture, body language, voice, whatever you notice, just as you did in that video. And so here we're really encouraging conversations without words. And we know from research with both typically developing children through the early years of language development and also neurodiverse children, especially those on the autism spectrum, that this is the critical moment in development that helps language last in the future, whether that's language through AAC or language through spoken means or both. If we skip this back and forth, we have a very shaky trunk. And then our branches, they're just not healthy. And we can see some scripted language or repetitive language, but we don't usually see language that is lasting and complex over time. So we can support this through all the steps that we've talked about so far, making sure that first and foremost, we're helping these kids regulate and engage in our relationship. And then once we've got that nice regulation and engagement, I put the term mind sight here. I don't know if anybody's read the Whole Brain Child. Has anybody read that? It's a great book. If you haven't, please read it. It's amazing. But this concept of mindset is really that idea I talked about before. It's holding your child's intentions in mind, trying to put yourself into their position. What are they thinking? What are they trying to achieve here? What are they feeling here? And how can I respond in a way that attunes to that? And also matches the meaning. Can my words match what my child is thinking and not what I want them to do right now? Can I put my agenda to the side to help them really make meaning through language, both spoken and maybe signing or using some AAC at the same time of what is going on in our interaction together. So I want to take another moment to share a video. I want to encourage you to kind of spot in this video the ways in which the partner, the mother here, is helping this child achieve some circles of communication and also some independence with their skills at the same time.
Good job. You get your water. Now it's empty. You need to put more water. Go try again. Oh, good job. You stopped it before it got too full. Now you can drink it. Good job, Catman.
So it's another simple clip, but there were several opportunities in that interaction where mom could have stepped in and corrected, right? Don't dump it out. You're supposed to be getting it to drink. But she didn't. She let him problem solve. He had to sequence tons of actions. Tons is a little bit embellishment, but you get my point. He had to sequence several actions in order to get that task done. My guess is it's something that he's done before and that he got encouragement and help in the early stages of. But what you were able to see is that delicate balance of back and forth, but also the space that he needed to learn how to plan and execute a task, right? And those types of activities are actually really great for helping children plan and execute language and thinking actions as well. So the body and the mind are connected. When we are able to sequence actions like this, we can actually sequence thoughts and ideas related to these actions. And it gives us a platform as well to do some nice back and forth communication. So moving up that chunk then, I said we were going to walk through those first 4 stages of social emotional development. This is the last one that we'll talk about today. This is, I believe, where many of you as parents are really hoping to get to. And that is complex language, right? Complex communication, really helping kids learn how to use speech and language to communicate more clearly what they want to share with you. And so it's at this stage of development that really comes after the ones we've just discussed. These are stepping stones in development, so they're not time bound. Every kid's going to take their time to move through these stages, but they are stepwise in that you do need to master one before you can truly move and stay into the next. And so this is really where we're thinking more about language in its forms and also speech, but also thinking about the ways we can support tools in that process for children who are struggling with coordinating those speech movements. And so this is where we're going to use our AAC, and I'm going to talk in a minute about that. But more importantly, we're going to also make sure that we're not focusing too much on the task of language at the expense of the interaction. And this can happen when you're feeling a lot of pressure as a parent to constantly be using your AAC device or to be focusing on sign language. You can become maybe a little bit like a taskmaster at this task, right? And then the interaction can sometimes be pushed to the side and the child might disengage. So I think we're always keeping that interaction at the heart, but thinking here, this is the stage where we can really add meaning through language to what our child wants to do, what they want to achieve with us. And we can do that in multiple modalities. And one of those modalities, of course, is AAC. How many parents have children who are using AAC devices right now? Quite a few. So AAC is really the tool. It is not the goal. However, it can get in the way, can it, of an interaction and kind of getting connection with your child. However, it is a great way of providing access to language when speech is not readily available, either for the long term or for the short term. I think that where I have found AAC come in most handy with working with families who have kids with CTD is in replacing speech when it's not there, but also in repairing speech when it's unclear. And so I work a lot with my families in helping them use their AAC devices to really help their child see what words are available to use in this really fun activity or interaction that we're having together. Let's play around with our words. Let's see what happens when we push this button and what will mom do or what will our nanny do. And I've also used it with families in helping them see how they can teach their child to repair when their speech is not clear. And I know that speech clarity can be a persistent challenge for kids with CTD. I know the little one you'll see in the video here, that is his number one challenge. When we first started working together, I don't know that his family truly believed that he was going to speak. I did, because I don't have a crystal ball to tell me otherwise, so I just plunge ahead with that idea that we're going to work on speech and language together. But he is quite unclear, and so that can really put a hiccup in his interactions sometimes. I want to take a moment here just to plant the seed to, we've heard a lot this last few days about being your child's strongest advocate. I encourage you to push for emergent literacy instruction early in your child's educational career. If your providers and teachers are not working on literacy instruction, and there are different types of literacy instruction that I'm happy to share my knowledge on if you're interested, you're really losing time. And so I would encourage you, for the sake of lifetime learning, to work on literacy, but also for the sake of communication, because picture-based AAC is not the end goal. Even for children who don't develop speech, they need to be able to read and spell in order to truly articulate everything that they're thinking to us. So I think supporting this idea of speech and language, we know we need multiple modalities. I just want to speak a little bit to the speech piece here, because I know that not all speech therapists are created equal in terms of their support. And so I encourage you, if speech is something on your priority list, that you really spend some time understanding the nature of your child's specific speech challenges. For example, with the brain involvement of CTD and related disorders, there is perhaps a dysarthria or a weakening of the muscles of the mouth that are going on. There could be a discoordination or a motor planning or apraxia piece to your child's speech challenges as well. And it'll be very important for your speech therapist to understand these differences and to be willing to partner with you on that journey of really understanding the underlying reasons for your child's speech differences so that they can target those using the right evidence-based practices. For example, traditional articulation therapy is likely not appropriate for many kids with CTD. So I wanted to just end with a video that kind of shows some of the ways in which multimodal or many different ways of communication kind of come into play in helping kids with these complex needs communicate. In this video, I'm hoping that you'll see a little bit of some of those balanced approaches where we're letting that child lead, we're following his interests. You'll hear his speech is quite unclear, so we're using something called recasting to share his language back to him in a correct form. But we're also using his AAC device to really try to scaffold some of the language around the story he's trying to tell.
Breakfast. Not lunch yet. It's too early.
None.
No, it's too early for lunch.
Not lunch now.
I'm so full. Pizza. You gonna have pizza for breakfast?
Papa and eating that.
And
Popcorn and teacher snack.
popcorn and teacher snack.
And eating that room.
In the snack room, there's popcorn for the teachers.
I'm gonna move this over here so we have some space.
Baby dog.
Veggie straws are my favorite snack.
And you didn't want baby dog.
Veggie straws.
Veggie straws. Which teacher likes veggie straws?
It's a Rudy baby dog.
Oh, Teacher Ruti always gives the veggie
Yeah,
straws.
veggies.
What is baby dog peanut butter?
I wonder if Teacher Ruti has her veggie straws at... Oh, you have something to say. Okay. I was going to wonder...
I'm going to stop it for the sake of time, but you'll see he didn't want me touching his device at that point. But one of the key takeaways I hope that you'll bring out of this talk as well is how important it is for you to speak to your children using their AAC device. You didn't get a chance to see a lot of that in that clip, but part of our modeling and making meaning for kids is really we need to speak to them with spoken words, but also show them some of the key concepts on their AAC as we're engaging with them in natural interactions. I went a little over on time, so I'm going to pause and end my presentation here and just see if there's any questions for the last few minutes we have. I also want to make sure that, I am available for a couple more hours today. If anybody has questions or wants to chat at lunchtime, just come and find me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tanna. Working with you and then listening to you today, I just love how empowered I feel in making the assumption that my son is so much more emotionally complex and capable of so much more than we might give him credit for. So it's opened my eyes a lot. So any questions?
Thank you for the terrific presentation. I was very interested when you said traditional articulation therapy is not appropriate for children with CTD. We've been getting a lot of that without a lot of results. Can you say a little bit more about why that doesn't work well and what might be a better type of therapy, maybe more specifically than building the bonds and whatnot that you presented here?
Yes, and when it's working. So great. I think that what I've noticed in just working with colleagues in my own field is we tend to lump speech differences into like two major buckets. They're either articulation differences, which is something like a frontal distortion, right? Like saying "thoop" for soup, or they're phonological differences, which is actually more of a brain-based pattern difference, where I'm not, as a child, understanding the code of my speech sounds in my language, and so I may use processes to simplify my speech. When there's an appropriate diagnosis and a child truly does fall into one of those buckets, those two approaches work wonderfully. What I've noticed is many kids that I've worked with neurodevelopmental differences, and then the 2 families I've worked with kids who have CTD, they have more of a motor planning and sequencing element going on to their speech. And so sitting and drilling one particular sound at a time doesn't usually get the results over the time that we want to see them, that we're looking for. And so I would encourage families who have tried speech therapy and are not seeing great results to just have a conversation with your therapist about the type of approach that she's using or he's using. Is it an articulation approach? Is it a phonological approach? Do they have underlying understanding of the motor speech pieces to work on? And if not, are they willing to partner with you and learn a little bit more about that element and integrate those into their speech approach so that you can see faster, fast is a relative term, this takes time, but also just more meaningful and lasting results with speech. So I would clarify, articulation therapy works for kids who have articulation disorders. It doesn't work for kids who have motor speech disorders.
Hi, Tanna. Thank you so much for the presentation. Just a question in regards to the dysregulation, self-regulation piece. So our kiddo has a lot of tantrums and near immediately goes into self-injurious behaviors. And so it's a large event, essentially. And so we try to get him to a safe place and then just kind of give him time. Would you suggest more so that one of us just try to go over and just engage and kind of without verbal, like do the rubbing of the back and all of that we saw, or because obviously the tantrum is, the behavior is a mode of communication, like what thoughts do you have on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think sometimes we're coached, I know I was coached as a parent of a child who is neurotypical, to ignore tantrums. However, I think it's really important to work with your behavior team and your occupational therapist and others on your team that are knowledgeable about your child's profile to understand their particular routes to regulation. Most of the time, we're not going to regulate when people ignore us. And sometimes we do need to step away as parents because we can't bring a regulated presence. I know I've done this as a mother myself, where you don't want my comfort, you're kicking me, you're hitting me, and so I've got to step away. But I would work with your team to try to explore some of the routes of regulation through touch and connection that your child may respond to. And I would practice those when you're not in a red zone. Right, when your child is not in a total epic meltdown and on the verge of self-injury, can we practice some of these regulating rituals together and see how he responds or she responds, and then bring some of those strategies in when we're in more of a red zone. So I think not all kids are going to love touch. Some of them are going to be more dysregulated by that. So you'll need to work on understanding your child's profile. You probably understand quite a bit of it, but maybe putting it down in a systematic way and having someone as a sounding board to say, maybe some of this would be helpful during these moments rather than leaving him or her to her own devices.
Hi. Thank you again for your presentation. My son does a lot of scripting of language. We think he might be a good language processor. How do I work past that? Many of you in here have probably experienced that. He gets stuck on saying something. Lately it's like what time it is, and he'll ask everybody that and then go back and ask everybody again. And it's a sign of communication and how to engage, but how do I move past that with him so he's not like stuck in that phrase or that model?
Yeah. So there has been some good evidence coming out that verbal perseveration, such as what you're describing, is really a good window into how anxious a child is feeling. We don't have great mental health support for kids with limited language right now, unfortunately, but that is an avenue that I would suggest exploring. Play therapy, occupational therapy, and other therapies like it that could really help find some ways to regulate that anxiety, could reduce the perseveration. But it isn't always anxiety. Sometimes with gestalts, we see kids have lots of different reasons for using the same gestalt. And so one of the strategies I've been using with one family that you saw in the videos today is we're really creating an inventory of gestalts and trying our best across the team to figure out, what does this mean in this moment? And then how do I tailor my response? And so we're taking data on it right now to figure out which of our responses actually reduce the behavior and also regulate the child at the same time. So you may need to use a little bit of that inventory approach where you're tracking those and then trying out some different responses that meet your child's need, but also reduce that behavior because they're now able to use a different behavior to achieve that purpose. Are we done?
No. So
No,
should
okay.
we keep? So Gio, we have them in AVA. So we should we have them just in AVA, or should we do AVA and traditional school?
That's the question of the year, isn't it? I don't claim to know the magic bullet. I was actually asked the other day if I believe that ABA works, and I do believe that ABA works. I do believe that it depends on the provider, and that there is no one therapy that's going to address all of your child's needs, unfortunately. And that puts a lot of pressure on you to have to figure out where to put limited resources and time. I do believe that different ABA schools are going to also have a little bit more of a focus on communication and academic development than others. And so I think you really need to take stock about the program that you choose and weigh as a family, does this have everything we know we want for our child? One of the things that traditional schools can offer that I hear a lot of parents talk about is peer opportunities. But I would caution you to throwing all your eggs in that basket, because peer opportunities are wonderful. However, if the support is not available to help children take advantage of peer opportunities, they're wasted opportunities. And so it is kind of that balance of how do I make sure I choose the program that has the opportunity and the right support for my child to capitalize on it. That did not answer your question, but if you'd like to talk more afterward, let me know. Hi.
Hello, I'm right in front of you, but
thank you. I can see you.
Didn't know if I had this on. Thank you so much for presenting. I have a son with CTD who's 4.5, and he's just switched to prompt speech therapy at a new clinic because we felt like his speech development was not necessarily getting much better. He has an AAC device, but we feel like since he switched, he does dual therapy with OT with speech and prompt therapy, and they just introduced feeding therapy for him as well because of, they think that, basically what you said, the muscle development is also very weak, and he's trying to talk, but he can't quite form that. Do you have experience or thoughts on prompt speech therapy? And then that's my first question, and then I did want to just share what they found with him is when they can do some play type therapy / kind of inverting him prior to getting him to sit still and focus on a task, he does so much better than just trying to go straight into a task. So I thought that was kind of cool and a new learning and finding for us with him.
Yeah, and such a deviation from more of the traditional tabletop speech therapy that a lot of my colleagues have used. But I am not prompt trained, but I'm aware of the prompt principles. And for anybody who doesn't know, prompt is a specific style of motor speech intervention that people are trained in, and it involves some physical manipulation of the speech musculature as well. I have met families who have had great success with prompt in getting your kids over the speech hump. I love that they're using play and movement and prep because a lot of families struggle when they take children who are not yet imitating readily to a speech therapist to assess them. The assessment tends to come back with not a lot of useful information because in order to participate in many of our tests that we have available, you have to actually be able to and willing to copy words. And so sometimes that can limit families from getting into therapies like prompt because their providers may be hesitant to move forward with that approach because they don't have the right diagnosis for it. But I think what prompt offers, especially when used in a child-led way like you're describing, is more focus on helping that child sequence movement because that's really what a motor speech problem is. It isn't that I don't know that you're saying it's that I cannot sequence my movements. I could say in this word, but not in another word, or I can say it on Tuesday, but not on Thursday afternoon. And so that inconsistency can be really challenging, and a prompt support method can be helpful with that.
We have one more question. It'll be our last question.
Thanks for your presentation. My name is Ed. I'm Dad from Kim, you probably know from the guide. And I'm also Dad from Rick, who's 18 years old now and has CTD. I don't have a question, but I want to give you a little example, and I'll make it brief due to the time we have. But Rick was just according like the little guy in the movies we saw. He has his own language, nobody understands it, but we could. And I think kids with CTD are there in different gradations. Probably Rick has a slight gradation of CTD, but we stimulated him every time, and probably Rick had a hard time because his mom was a teacher, so it wasn't always easy for him at home, but we continuously supported him and stimulated him for speaking, and I can tell you now that Rick can speak very good. Everybody understands him. Rick can read his little books, and Rick can also send me text messages. So there's hope for everyone, and I think our CTD kids can learn more than we will believe. So keep up the good work and keep up hope. Thank you.
Thank you.